she collapsed on the stairs. Her 6-year-old son dialed the wrong number, only to reach the billionaire CEO ex who abandoned them. "Hello, my wonderful family. May the Almighty cover every woman with lasting health, a spirit untouched by sorrow, and a courage that rises above every storm. May He heal those in pain, give peace to those who feel tired, and watch over every mother, sister, daughter, and wife who pours out love without measure. May no woman here ever lose her glow, for she is the heartbeat of our homes and the keeper of our souls. My dearest family, today holds a deep meaning for me. It is mine and Binta's 32nd engagement anniversary. I share this joy with you because you are not just viewers. You are my family, and every happiness I hold belongs to all of us together. If your heart is sincere, write, present. If your love is true, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Desperation has a sound. It's the trembling voice of a child who doesn't understand why the grown-ups have stopped fighting and started crying. Olivia. Bent Cole's world ended on step 13 of her childhood home, her knees buckling as the final eviction notice slipped from fingers that had held too many rejection letters. Too many pink slips, too many promises that crumbled like ash. The foreclosure papers scattered around her like fallen leaves, each one marking another dream that poverty had devoured while she wasn't looking. 6 years. 6 years since Clayton Osgood had chosen Isabella Whitmore's family fortune over their love. 6 years since she'd discovered she was pregnant 3 weeks too late to tell him. 6 years of working herself to the bone while raising their son alone in a world that seemed designed to crush single mothers under the weight of impossible choices. "Mama!" Charles's voice cut through her haze of defeat. Her 6-year-old son stood in the doorway, his Superman backpack sliding off thin shoulders, brown eyes, Clayton's eyes, wide with the kind of fear that children shouldn't have to feel. "Mama, why are you on the floor?" She tried to answer, tried to summon the smile that had carried them through evictions and empty refrigerators, and nights spent sleeping in their ancient Honda because the shelters were full. But the fracture in her left foot, the one she'd been ignoring for weeks because doctor visits cost money they didn't have, chose that moment to remind her that some pain couldn't be powered through with determination alone. The world tilted sideways as agony shot up her leg, and Olivia found herself looking at her son through a haze of tears and grinding bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could touch. "Charles, baby, I need you to call someone," she whispered, each word a monumental effort. "Call who, Mama?" "Anyone, someone who can help us." At 6 years old, Charles possessed the kind of serious intelligence that came from growing up too fast, from learning to read adult faces for signs of trouble, from understanding that when Mama worked 3 jobs and still couldn't pay rent, the world was a dangerous place where small mistakes had enormous consequences. He found Olivia's phone in her purse, its cracked screen reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that would soon belong to strangers. His small fingers scrolled through her nearly empty contact list. Rosa, their friend who sometimes let them sleep on her couch. Dr. Peterson, Charles's pediatrician, and one entry labeled simply C that she'd never had the courage to delete. Clayton. The name she'd whispered in labor when Charles fought his way into the world. The ghost that haunted every birthday party where other children's fathers cheered from sidelines while she stood alone. The memory that turned every lullaby into a requiem for the family they should have been. "Mama, should I call the C person?" Charles asked, his finger hovering over the contact. Olivia's heart stopped. She'd saved Clayton's number 6 years ago when they'd been planning a future that included Sunday morning pancakes and Christmas trees, and growing old together in a house filled with laughter. She'd never called it. Pride and heartbreak had seen to that. But she'd never deleted it either, keeping it like a scar that reminded her what love could cost. "I don't know, baby. That person might not remember us. But what if they do? What if they want to help? The faith in his voice broke something inside her chest. Here was her son, this beautiful boy who'd learned to tie his shoes and read bedtime stories and comfort his mother when she cried, suggesting they reach out to the man who'd walked away before Charles drew his first breath. "Okay," she whispered, because sometimes surrender was the only choice left. "Try calling." 300 miles away, in a gleaming Chicago conference room overlooking the river, Clayton Osgood was orchestrating the most important deal of his career. $2 billion hung in the balance as lawyers shuffled contracts and executives nodded at his every word. His phone buzzed against the mahogany table, unknown number, and he almost declined the call. But something made him answer. "Clayton Osgood, please help us." The desperate cry of a child exploded through the speaker, causing 20 suits to look up in surprise. "My mama fell down and she's hurt, and I don't know what to do." "Slow down," Clayton said, his billionaire composure cracking as something familiar stirred in his chest. "What's your name?" "Charles. Charles Bent Cole. My mama needs help, and you're the only person in her phone who might answer." "Bent Cole." The surname hit Clayton like a physical blow. In the background, barely audible but unmistakable, came the broken sob of a woman whose voice had haunted his dreams for 6 years. "Olivia," he whispered, and 20 powerful men watched their untouchable CEO's face crumble like a man witnessing the resurrection of the dead. "Is that my mama's name? She won't talk to me, and there's blood on her foot, and Charles, listen to me very carefully. Can you tell me exactly where you are?" "The old house. Mama said this used to be her house when she was little like me. The mailbox says 1247 Maple Street. Clayton knew that address. He'd found it in property records during his desperate 3-year search for Olivia, but by the time he'd gotten there, the house had been sold, and the new owners had no information about where she'd gone. "I'm coming to get you both. Stay on the phone with me, okay? But please hurry. I'm really scared." Clayton was already standing, grabbing his keys, while $2 billion in contracts sat forgotten on the mahogany table. "Tell me about your mama, Charles. Is she breathing?" "Yes, but she's crying, and her foot looks really bad, and she keeps saying she's sorry." "She doesn't need to be sorry. None of this is her fault." As Clayton ran from the boardroom, leaving behind deals worth more than most countries' GDP, he pressed the phone to his ear like a lifeline, listening to a 6-year-old boy describe the woman Clayton had never stopped loving. His Maserati roared to life as he broke every speed limit racing across Chicago. Charles's frightened voice, his only anchor to sanity. "Mister, are you really coming to help us?" "Yes, I promise I'm coming." "Good. Mama really needs someone to take care of her for once. She's always taking care of me, but nobody ever takes care of her." The simple observation hit Clayton like a sledgehammer. For 6 years, while he'd been building an empire and attending charity galas, Olivia had been alone, working herself to exhaustion while raising their son with nothing but love and determination. Their son, because looking at Charles's picture on Olivia's cracked phone screen, Clayton could see himself reflected in every line of the boy's face. He found them on those familiar front steps, Olivia unconscious against the railing. Charles curled beside her like a guardian angel, still clutching the phone. The sight of her nearly drove him to his knees. She was painfully thin, her once glorious curves carved away by years of choosing between her own meals and Charles's needs. "Are you Clayton?" Charles asked, studying him with unnerving intensity. "I am. You look like me. Are we related?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun as Clayton gently lifted Olivia into his arms, shocked by how light she'd become. "We'll talk about that later, buddy. Right now we need to get your mama to a doctor." As they raced toward Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Clayton caught Charles's eyes in the rearview mirror. The boy was studying him with the kind of solemn concentration that suggested he was solving a puzzle that adults had tried to hide from him. "Mr. Clayton." "Yeah? Thank you for coming when I called." Mama always says nobody's going to save us, but I think maybe she was wrong. The words shattered something in Clayton's chest, because he realized that for the first time in 6 years, Olivia Bent-Cole was absolutely wrong. Someone had come to save them, someone who should have been there all along. Chapter 2. Broken Bones. Hidden Truths. The cruelest injuries are the ones that never show on X-rays, the fractures of the heart that heal crooked and leave you limping through life, waiting for the next break. Northwestern Memorial Hospital's emergency room hummed with controlled chaos. But for Clayton Osgood, the world had narrowed to the small examination room where Olivia lay unconscious on a gurney, her face pale as winter moonlight and her left foot twisted at an angle that made his stomach clench with guilt and rage. Severe stress fracture, Dr. Mae Jemison explained, clipping X-rays to the light board with clinical efficiency. The bone has been compromised for weeks, possibly months. She's been walking on this injury without treatment, which explains why it finally gave way completely. Charles sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, his small legs swinging nervously as he clutched a juice box the nurses had given him. Clayton found himself studying the boy's profile, cataloguing every familiar feature while his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird seeking freedom. The resemblance was undeniable. Charles had Clayton's exact eyes, the same stubborn cowlick that had defied every expensive stylist in Chicago, the identical way of tilting his head when deep in thought. Looking at this 6-year-old was like staring at photographs of himself as a child. "Will she be okay?" Charles asked, his voice small but steady. "She'll be fine," Dr. Mae Jemison assured him, "but she's going to need complete rest for at least 10 weeks. No weight-bearing whatsoever for the first 6 weeks, then gradual rehabilitation with physical therapy." 10 weeks. Clayton ran a hand through his hair, the gesture that Charles unconsciously mirrored. "What about work? What about—" "Mr. Osgood," the doctor interrupted gently, "I need to be direct with you about something else the X-rays revealed. This woman is severely malnourished. Her bone density is dangerously low, and there are signs of chronic stress that suggest she's been living in survival mode for an extended period." The words hit Clayton like physical blows. While he'd been closing multi-million-dollar deals and collecting trophies for his business acumen, Olivia had been slowly starving herself to keep their son fed. "She works really hard," Charles said matter-of-factly, apparently noticing Clayton's stricken expression. "She cleans offices at night and serves food during the day, and sometimes she types things on the computer for people. She says 3 jobs means 3 times more money for important things like my school supplies and good food." 3 jobs? Clayton's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Uh-huh. And she's really good at making a little bit of food go a long way. Like we can make a can of soup last for 2 days if we add lots of water and crackers. Mama calls it stretching our blessings." Each innocent revelation was another nail in Clayton's chest. Soup stretched over 2 days. 3 jobs, stretching blessings. While he'd owned 3 homes and more cars than he could drive, his son had been learning that love could be measured in carefully rationed spoonfuls of broth. "Charles," Dr. Mae Jemison said gently, "can you tell me where you and your mama have been living?" "There are lots of different places. Sometimes we stay with Rosa, but her apartment is really small and has too many people already. Sometimes we sleep in our car, but Mama makes it fun by telling me stories about adventures. And sometimes we get to stay at the shelter downtown, which has really good soup and people who read to kids." Clayton felt something murderous rise in his throat. Shelters, cars. His son, because Charles was his son, he was absolutely certain now, had been homeless while Clayton owned a penthouse worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. "But Mama always makes sure I have somewhere safe to sleep," Charles continued with fierce loyalty. "She says home isn't a place, it's wherever we're together. And we're always together, so we're always home." The simple philosophy of love triumphing over circumstances hit Clayton like a sledgehammer. This 6-year-old had been raised to find joy in homelessness because his mother had somehow made love and security out of nothing but determination and sacrifice. A soft moan from the bed drew their attention. Olivia's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found Charles's worried face. "Baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse from pain medication. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mama. Clayton came to help us, just like I hoped he would." Olivia's gaze shifted to Clayton, and he watched every emotion flicker across her face in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a fury so pure it could have powered the hospital's electrical grid. "You," she breathed, struggling to sit up despite the cast now encasing her foot. "What are you doing here?" "Charles called me. He found my number in your phone and—" "Charles called you?" Her voice rose dangerously. "How did you get my number?" "I never gave you my number. You saved it 6 years ago," Clayton said quietly. "When we were together. You never deleted it, and Charles found it when he needed help." Olivia stared at him as if he were a ghost materializing in her hospital room. "That's impossible. You chose Isabella. You chose her family's money over us." "I never chose Isabella over you." "Then why didn't you answer when I called? Why didn't you respond to my letters? Why did your assistant tell me you'd moved on and didn't want to be bothered with calls from desperate ex-girlfriends?" The pain in her voice cut through Clayton like broken glass. "What calls? What letters? What assistant?" "Margaret something. She worked at your company. She made it very clear that you wanted nothing to do with me or my pregnancy." Clayton's blood turned to ice. "Olivia, I never had an assistant named Margaret, and I never received any calls or letters from you. I would never—" "Stop!" Olivia's voice cracked with 6 years of suppressed anguish. "Just stop lying to me. You made your choice. You married her. I didn't marry Isabella. I broke our engagement 3 years ago." The words hit the room like a physical force. Olivia went very still, her face cycling through confusion, hope, and something that might have been terror. "That's not possible." "Charles," Clayton said gently, "would you like to go get some ice cream from the cafeteria? I saw a whole freezer full downstairs." "Can I really? Mama usually says ice cream is for special occasions." "Today is very special," Clayton assured him, handing the boy a $20 bill. "Take your time picking a flavor." After Charles left, practically bouncing with the rare luxury of choosing his own treat, Clayton pulled his chair closer to Olivia's bed. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said. 3 years ago, I hired 5 different private investigators to find you. I spent over $300,000 searching for any trace of where you'd gone after you disappeared. They all came back with nothing, like you'd vanished completely from the face of the earth. I didn't disappear. I was here, in Chicago, working at Jimmy's Diner on Michigan Avenue, cleaning offices in the Loop, babysitting for families in Lincoln Park. I know that now. Someone made sure I'd never find you, and they made sure you'd never reach me. Who would do that? Clayton pulled out his phone, scrolling to a folder marked Web Investigation. "I'm going to show you something, but I want you to prepare yourself. What we discovered about Isabella's family, it's worse than either of us imagined." He showed her bank records, surveillance photos, recorded phone conversations, evidence of a conspiracy so elaborate and cruel it seemed like something from a thriller novel. The Whitmore family hadn't just interfered with their relationship. They'd systematically destroyed it to protect their own financial interests. "They kept you poor on purpose," Clayton said quietly as Olivia stared at the evidence. "Every job interview that mysteriously went nowhere, every apartment application rejected despite good credit. They were pulling strings to keep you desperate and isolated." "Why?" The word came out as a whisper, because Isabella's family was going bankrupt. They needed our marriage to save their textile empire, and they saw you as an obstacle to a merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Olivia's hands shook as she leafed through photographs of herself taken without her knowledge over the past 6 years, showing her at work, picking Charles up from daycare, sleeping in her car outside a 24-hour laundromat. They've been watching us. They have files on Charles, Olivia, school records, medical information, psychological evaluations done without your knowledge. They were building a case to destroy your credibility if you ever tried to claim child support. The violation was staggering. These people had turned her son into a pawn in their financial chess game, documenting every moment of struggle to use against her if necessary. "I think I'm going to be sick," Olivia whispered. "There's more." Clayton showed her the final piece of evidence, recorded conversations between Isabella and her father, planning his courtship like a military campaign. "Our entire relationship was orchestrated from the beginning. They researched your background, your schedule, even your favorite restaurants. Every coincidental meeting was planned." Charles bounded back into the room, chocolate ice cream smeared across his face and pure joy radiating from every pore. "Mama, they had 17 flavors. I got chocolate chip cookie dough supreme with extra sprinkles." Looking at her son's happiness, the simple pleasure of a 6-year-old who just experienced the luxury of choice, Olivia felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "Charles," she said carefully, "what do you know about daddies?" "Just what other kids at school tell me. They say daddies teach you things and play catch and make sure monsters don't hide under your bed. What would you say if I told you that Clayton might be your daddy?" Charles looked between them with the serious concentration of a child processing life-changing information. "Would he want to be my daddy?" "Because I think I'd like that, but only if he really wants to, not because he has to." The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. "I've wanted to be your daddy since the moment I heard your voice on that phone," Clayton said, his throat tight with emotion. "I just didn't know you existed until today." Charles nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's okay. Mama says sometimes the best things take a while to find you, but when they do, you hold on really tight so they don't get lost again." "Is that what your mama says?" "Uh-huh. And Mama is really smart about love. She taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about not giving up on people even when things get hard." Clayton looked at Olivia, this woman who'd raised their son to be wise beyond his years while carrying the weight of abandonment she hadn't deserved. "I never gave up on you," he said. "I was kept away from you. But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life making up for the years I missed." "It's not that simple, Clayton." "Why not?" "Because I spent 6 years learning how to live without you. I built a life that doesn't need rescuing. Charles and I were okay on our own." "Are you?" Clayton gestured toward her cast, toward the hospital bracelet that marked her as an indigent patient. "Are you really okay, or are you just very good at surviving?" The question cut deep because they both knew the answer. Survival wasn't the same as living, and love, real, honest, committed love, was the difference between merely existing and truly being alive. "I don't know how to trust you again," Olivia whispered. "Then let me show you. Let me prove that this time I'm not going anywhere. What about your business, your life, all those important things that matter more than us?" Clayton pulled out his phone and without hesitation typed out a message to his board of directors. "Effective immediately, I'm taking an indefinite leave of absence. Personal family matters require my full attention." He hit send and showed her the screen. "The only thing that matters is sitting right here in this room." For the first time in 6 years, Olivia Bencole allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love could find a way to heal what money and lies had broken. But hope, she'd learned, was the most dangerous emotion of all. Chapter 3. Eyes Don't Lie. Recognition doesn't always arrive with trumpets and revelations. Sometimes it whispers through genetics, speaking in the curve of an ear and the stubborn angle of a cowlick that refuses to be tamed. Clayton's penthouse felt like a museum after the chaos of the hospital. all glass and steel and carefully curated emptiness that had never known the sound of children's laughter or the comfortable disorder that came with actual living. But as Charles explored the space with wide-eyed wonder, everything about Clayton's sterile sanctuary suddenly seemed like a mausoleum to a life unlived. "Wow," Charles breathed, pressing his face against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. "It's like living in the clouds." "Are you sure people are allowed to touch things?" "You can touch anything you want," Clayton assured him, though he found himself holding his breath as small fingers approached priceless art pieces with the casual disregard of childhood curiosity. Olivia sat rigidly in the wheelchair the hospital had provided, her injured foot elevated and her face a careful mask of controlled emotion. She'd agreed to come here only because Child Protective Services had made it clear that her current living situation, rotating between shelters and sleeping in cars, was unacceptable for a recovering patient with a dependent child. "This is temporary," she'd announced during the drive home in Clayton's Bentley, her voice cutting through the leather-scented silence like a blade. "The moment I can walk properly, we're finding our own place. Charles, don't wander around touching expensive things," she called now, watching her son discover a world of privilege he'd never imagined. "But Mama, look." Charles had found Clayton's entertainment system, his eyes wide as he took in the massive television and sophisticated sound equipment. "It's like a movie theater. Do rich people watch cartoons on screens this big? We're not here to watch television. We're here because I can't walk, and we have nowhere else to go." The bitterness in her voice made Clayton's chest ache. She was right to be angry. He understood that, but the wall she was building between them felt impenetrable. "Let me show you to your rooms," he offered, pushing her wheelchair himself when she stubbornly refused his help. The master suite had been prepared by his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, with the kind of thoughtful touches that money could buy: fresh flowers, luxurious linens, and a bathroom stocked with everything Olivia might need during her recovery. But she looked around the opulent space like it was a beautiful prison. "Charles can sleep with me," she said immediately. "Actually, I thought he might like his own room. There's a guest bedroom right next door." And Mrs. Chen set it up with some things a kid his age might enjoy. Charles had already wandered down the hallway, drawn by curiosity, and his excited squeal echoed back to them. "Mama! Mama, come see. It's like a toy store." Despite her determination to remain coldly distant, Olivia allowed Clayton to push her wheelchair to what had been a sterile guest room just hours earlier. Mrs. Chen had transformed it into a 6-year-old's paradise, complete with age-appropriate books, educational toys, and even a small desk, perfect for homework. "This is really all for me?" Charles asked, running his fingers along a detailed train set that must have cost more than Olivia made in a month. "If you want it," Clayton said, watching the boy's reaction carefully. "But I don't understand. You don't even know me." The innocent observation hit Clayton like a physical blow. "You're right," he thought. "I don't know you, and that's the greatest tragedy of my life. Sometimes people like to do nice things for other people," Clayton said carefully, "especially when those people have been very brave." "Brave how?" "Taking care of your mama when she needed help. Calling for help when you were scared. That takes real courage." Charles considered this seriously, then looked at Olivia. "Mama, is it okay if I play with these toys?" Olivia's face was a battleground of emotions. Gratitude warring with pride, desperation fighting independence. Finally she nodded. "You can play with them while we're here. But remember, we're just visiting." As Charles dove into exploring his temporary treasure trove, Clayton noticed him pause at a small mirror on the dresser. The boy stared at his reflection, then turned to study Clayton's face with the kind of intensity that made adults uncomfortable. "You have the same color eyes as me," Charles observed with scientific precision. "I do. And your hair does that funny thing in the front where it sticks up, even when you try to make it flat." Clayton's hand automatically went to his cowlick, the same stubborn lock of hair that had defeated every expensive stylist in Chicago. It's always done that. Mine too. Mama tries to fix it with water and that goopy hair stuff, but it never stays down. Charles continued his visual comparison with the thoroughness of a detective, cataloguing similarities with the matter-of-fact observation skills of a 6-year-old who'd learned to notice details. The shape of their ears, the way they both squinted slightly when concentrating, the identical arch of their eyebrows. "We look like we could be related," Charles said suddenly. The statement hung in the air like a loaded gun. Olivia went very still in her wheelchair, and Clayton felt his heart stop beating for several long seconds. "What makes you think that?" Clayton asked carefully. "Because you look like me, but grown up? Not exactly the same, but like how I might look when I'm big. And you knew where to find us, even though Mama didn't tell anyone we were at the old house." The logic was devastatingly simple and absolutely correct. Clayton knelt beside Charles, bringing them to eye level. "Charles, what do you know about daddies? I know some kids have them and some kids don't. Mama says some families are different and that's okay. She says my daddy wasn't ready to be a daddy when I was born. But that doesn't mean anything's wrong with me." The explanation hit Clayton like a sledgehammer. Olivia had crafted a story that protected Charles's self-worth while taking all the pain of abandonment onto herself. "What do you think a daddy would do?" Clayton asked gently. "I think he'd want to take care of me and Mama. I think he'd teach me important things and help me when I have problems I can't figure out by myself. I think he'd make Mama smile more and worry less." Each word was another crack in Clayton's heart. This wise, beautiful child had created a perfect description of everything Clayton wanted to be. "And I think," Charles continued with devastating innocence, "that if I met my daddy, it would feel like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." The truth hung between them, undeniable and overwhelming. Clayton saw himself reflected in every line of Charles's face, heard his own speech patterns in the boy's careful explanations, recognized his own curiosity in those endless questions. "Charles," he said softly, "what would you say if I told you I think I'm your daddy?" From across the room came Olivia's sharp intake of breath, but Charles simply nodded as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "I'd say that makes sense," the boy replied. "But I'd also say you missed a lot of important things, and Mama might be really angry about that for a while." The understatement was delivered with 6-year-old wisdom that cut straight to the heart of their situation. "You're right about both of those things," Clayton admitted. "The question is, what do we do now?" Charles looked between Clayton and Olivia, processing the adult complexities with remarkable composure. "I think you should probably apologize to Mama first. Really apologize, not just say sorry, but mean it. And then maybe you could learn how to take care of us the way Mama takes care of me." "How does she take care of you?" "She makes sure I eat even when she's not hungry. She reads me stories, even when she's really tired. She works really hard at jobs she doesn't like, so I can have good things. She never gives up on me, even when I make mistakes." The simple catalogue of maternal devotion brought tears to Clayton's eyes. "That sounds like a very good mama. She's the best mama in the whole world. But she gets really sad sometimes, especially at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She looks at pictures on her phone and cries." "Pictures of what?" "I think they're pictures of you. She always hides them when I come in the room, but I saw them once. You were younger, and you looked really happy together." The revelation that Olivia had kept photos of them, that she'd grieved their lost love in private while being strong for their son, shattered something fundamental in Clayton's chest. "Charles," Olivia said quietly from across the room, "why don't you wash your hands for dinner?" "Okay, Mama, but can I ask one more question?" "What?" "If Clayton is my daddy, does that mean we get to be a real family now?" The innocent hope in his voice filled the room like sunlight, illuminating all the broken places that love might heal if they were brave enough to try. I don't know, baby, Olivia whispered. Real families are complicated. Not really, Charles said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. Families just love each other and don't give up, even when things get hard. That doesn't sound very complicated to me. Sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in the simple observations of a child who sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. Chapter 4. Learning to Stay. Love isn't a feeling that strikes like lightning. It's a choice made every morning when you wake up and decide that this person, this complicated, beautiful mess of a life, is worth fighting for. The smoke alarm's piercing shriek at 6:15 in the morning was Clayton's first indication that his attempt at breakfast had gone spectacularly wrong. Again. Oh no! Charles shouted from the kitchen doorway, but his voice carried more excitement than alarm. At 6 years old, he found adult incompetence endlessly entertaining. Clayton, the pancakes are on fire. The pancakes, if they could still be called that, resembled charcoal briquettes more than breakfast food. Smoke billowed from Clayton's expensive non-stick pan while he frantically waved a dish towel at the screaming alarm, trying to silence the mechanical protest that would undoubtedly wake Olivia. What in God's name? Olivia's voice cut through the chaos as she maneuvered her wheelchair into the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep and her expression cycling from alarm to exasperation. Clayton, what are you doing to my son's breakfast? Making pancakes, he said defensively, still battling the smoke alarm. Or trying to. It looks like you're trying to burn the building down, Charles observed helpfully, climbing onto his usual stool to get a better view of the disaster. Maybe pancakes are harder than they look? Turn off the burner. Open the windows and stop waving that towel around like you're surrendering to breakfast, Olivia instructed, with the patience of someone who dealt with kitchen disasters before. Clayton followed her directions, feeling approximately as competent as a toddler with a chemistry set. In his previous life, the one that seemed like ancient history now, he'd subsisted entirely on restaurant meals and catered events. His kitchen had been more decorative than functional. Why don't you just call Mrs. Chen to make breakfast? Olivia asked, wheeling herself closer to assess the damage. Because Mrs. Chen only comes twice a week, and I want to learn how to take care of you both myself. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Olivia's expression softened for just a moment before her defenses snapped back into place. We don't need you to take care of us. Maybe not, but I need to learn how. Charles, meanwhile, had found the bag of pancake mix and was reading the instructions with the serious concentration he brought to everything from homework to building block towers. I think the problem is you made the fire too hot, he announced. The box says medium heat, and you can test it by dropping a little bit of water in the pan. If it dances, it's ready. Your mama taught you that. Uh-huh. Mama knows how to cook lots of things, even with just one burner and no fancy stuff. She says cooking is like love. You have to pay attention and be patient, or it gets all burned and yucky. The simple wisdom hit Clayton like a revelation. For the next hour, he received a masterclass in basic cooking from a 6-year-old who'd learned kitchen wisdom from a mother who'd made miracles with limited resources. Not so fast with the flipping, Charles instructed as Clayton attempted his first successful pancake flip. Mama says you have to be gentle, like tucking a baby into bed. Your mama is very wise. She's the smartest person I know. She taught me to read when I was 4 because she said books could take you anywhere, even when you didn't have anywhere good to go. Another punch to Clayton's chest. While he'd been accumulating wealth and accolades, his son had been learning that literature was an escape route from harsh realities. What's your favorite book? Clayton asked. Where the Wild Things Are. Mama does all the voices and makes it really scary but fun. She says Max is brave because he's not afraid to feel big feelings, even when they're scary. I'd like to hear her read it sometime. You could read it to me tonight if you want, but you have to practice the voices first. Because the wild things sound different from regular people. Deal. They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table. Slightly lopsided, but actually edible pancakes that tasted like victory to Clayton and probably like charity to Olivia. Charles chattered about his plans for the day, filling the silence with the kind of comfortable noise that made the massive penthouse feel like a real home. "Can I help you make lunch too?" Charles asked when his plate was clean. "After you brush your teeth," Olivia said automatically. "I'll show him where everything is," Clayton offered. As they walked toward the guest bathroom, Charles slipped his small hand into Clayton's with the unconscious trust that children give to adults they've decided are safe. The contact sent an electric shock through Clayton's entire system. This was his son, his child, choosing to trust him despite everything. "Clayton?" Charles said as they stood side by side at the bathroom sink, both brushing their teeth. Are you going to stay with us?" The question, muffled by toothpaste, was the most important one Clayton had ever been asked. He rinsed his mouth carefully, buying time to find the right words. "Do you want me to stay?" "Yeah, but more important, do you want to stay?" Because Mama says wanting to do something is different from having to do something. People who have to do things usually get tired and leave. The wisdom in that observation was staggering. At 6 years old, Charles had already learned to distinguish between obligation and genuine desire, probably because he'd witnessed too many adults make promises they couldn't keep. "I want to stay," Clayton said seriously, "more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. Even if it's hard, because taking care of people is really hard sometimes. Mama gets tired and worried, and sometimes she cries when she thinks I can't see her. Even if it's hard, even if Mama stays angry at you for a while, because she's really good at being angry when someone hurts her feelings. Even then." Charles nodded, apparently satisfied with these answers. "Okay, but you should probably know that I have bad dreams sometimes. And Mama usually lets me sleep in her bed when that happens. That's good to know. And sometimes I ask too many questions because I want to understand everything. Mama says curiosity is a good thing, but some grown-ups get annoyed. I like questions. Ask me as many as you want. And I get scared about things I can't explain sometimes. Mama says that's okay, because feelings don't always make sense. But they're still real." Each revelation was another piece of the life Clayton had missed. Another glimpse into the deep bond between mother and son that had sustained them through years of uncertainty. "Charles," he said carefully, "what would you think if I told you that I love you?" The boy considered this with typical seriousness. "I'd think that was really nice, but I'd also think you should probably tell Mama first, because she's been taking care of me by herself for a really long time. And she should get to hear important things before I do." Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, after Charles had been read to and tucked in, with Clayton doing a creditable imitation of the wild things' voices, Clayton found Olivia on the balcony, staring out at Chicago's glittering skyline with an expression he couldn't read. "He's asleep," Clayton reported, settling into the chair beside her without waiting for permission. "Thank you. Olivia, we need to talk." "Do we?" "I love you. I loved you 6 years ago when we were planning a future together. I loved you through 6 years of not knowing where you were or if you were safe. And I love you now, seeing what an incredible mother you've become, watching how you raised our son to be kind and wise and brave." She was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I loved you too. So much it nearly destroyed me when you disappeared from my life." "I never disappeared. I was stolen from you." "By who?" "People who saw our love as an inconvenience to their financial plans. People who are going to pay for what they took from us." "Clayton, but before I deal with them, I need you to know something. Charles asked me today if I was going to stay. Not if I could stay or if I should stay, but if I was going to stay." And I realized that's the only question that matters. What did you tell him? I told him yes. I'm staying, not because I have to, not because it's the right thing to do, not because you need me. I'm staying because this, he gestured between them toward the apartment where their son slept peacefully. This is the only life worth living. Olivia's hands were trembling in her lap. I'm scared, Clayton. Of what? Of trusting you. Of letting Charles get attached to the idea of having a father. Of believing this is real and having you leave when something better comes along. Nothing better exists. You don't know that. You've been a billionaire bachelor for 6 years. You don't know what it's like to be responsible for a child every single day, to put someone else's needs before your own every single time, to worry constantly about money and safety and whether you're screwing up the most important job in the world. You're right. I don't know those things, but I want to learn them. I want to worry about Charles's homework and his friendships and whether he's eating enough vegetables. I want to lie awake at night, planning his birthday parties and college funds, and wondering if I'm being too strict or too lenient. Those are just pretty words. Clayton, then let me prove it with actions. Let me show up every day. Let me learn to make pancakes that don't require calling the fire department. Let me be the man you needed 6 years ago and the father Charles deserves now. Tears were sliding down her cheeks, catching the city lights like diamonds. I don't know how to let you in again. Start small. Let me make breakfast tomorrow without burning down the kitchen. Let me read Charles another bedtime story. Let me prove that some promises are worth keeping. And if you change your mind, if this gets too hard or too boring or too real, then I'll be the man who broke his son's heart and lost the love of his life twice. And I'll deserve whatever hell that brings me. The honesty in his voice seemed to reach something deep inside her, some carefully guarded place where hope lived, despite every reason to abandon it. I still love you, she whispered. I hate that I do, but I never stopped. I love you too. Both of you. Always have, always will. When he kissed her, it tasted like forgiveness and possibility and the dangerous joy of second chances that might actually last this time. Above them, the stars witnessed two hearts choosing to trust despite every reason to guard themselves. And in the distance, their son slept peacefully, dreaming of a family that might finally be complete. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Web. The most devastating betrayals are authored not by enemies, but by those who smile while they steal your life. One carefully orchestrated lie at a time, David Webb had the weathered face of a man who'd spent 25 years excavating secrets that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He sat across from Clayton's mahogany desk at dawn, a thick manila folder between his hands, and an expression that suggested Clayton wasn't going to enjoy what he'd uncovered. You're going to want to pour yourself something strong for this, Webb said without preamble. It's 6:30 in the morning. Trust me, you'll need it. Clayton remained standing at his office window, looking out at the Chicago skyline that had once felt like his kingdom and now felt like a stage where he'd been performing someone else's script for 6 years. Tell me, he said. Webb opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph, Isabella. Whitmore entering Clayton's office building. Timestamped 6 years and 2 months ago. This was taken the morning after you had that fight with Ms. Bent Cole. According to sworn testimony from your former assistant, Margaret Walsh, Ms. Whitmore spent 4 hours in this building that day. Doing what? Convincing your entire staff that Ms. Bent Cole was a mentally unstable gold digger trying to trap you with a false pregnancy claim. She was very persuasive, apparently. Offered to protect you from harassment by ensuring any communication from Ms. Bent Cole never reached you. Clayton's hands clenched into fists. Margaret told me Olivia never called. Margaret was paid $75,000 over 18 months to make sure that was true. Webb spread out bank records showing regular payments from a Whitmore family trust to Margaret Walsh. Every phone call was intercepted. Every letter was destroyed. Every email was deleted before it reached your inbox. The next photograph showed Olivia at a payphone outside Clayton's building, visibly pregnant, desperation written in every line of her posture. She tried for 9 months to reach you, Mr. Osgood. When the phones didn't work, she tried showing up in person. Security was instructed to escort her off the premises. By whose authority? Isabella's. She'd convinced them she was acting as your representative, protecting you from stalking behavior. Each revelation hit Clayton like a physical assault. While he'd been wondering why the woman he loved had vanished without explanation, she'd been fighting desperately to tell him about their son, only to be systematically blocked at every turn. It gets worse, Webb continued grimly. He produced a second set of documents, employment records, rental applications, credit reports. The Whitmore family didn't just intercept your communications. They actively sabotaged Ms. Bent Cole's life. The evidence was staggering in its scope and cruelty. Every job interview that had mysteriously gone nowhere. Every apartment application rejected, despite excellent credit. Every opportunity that had evaporated without explanation, all traced back to Whitmore influence and money. They kept her poor deliberately, Clayton said, the words tasting like poison, and isolated. Look at this. Webb showed him a series of emails between Isabella and various members of Chicago's social elite, systematically spreading rumors that Olivia was mentally unbalanced and prone to stalking wealthy men. By the time your engagement to Isabella was announced, half the city believed you'd narrowly escaped a dangerous obsession. Clayton stared at the evidence of Olivia's character assassination, feeling something murderous rise in his chest. How deep does this conspiracy go? Deeper than you can imagine. Webb pulled out surveillance photographs. Olivia working at a diner, picking Charles up from school, sleeping in her car outside a 24-hour laundromat. They've been monitoring her and your son for 5 years. They know everything about Charles, his teachers, his medical records, his academic performance. They've been watching my son. They obtained his medical records illegally, conducted psychological evaluations without Ms. Bent Cole's knowledge, and built a comprehensive file designed to destroy her credibility if she ever tried to claim paternity or child support. The violation was breathtaking in its scope. These people had turned Clayton's child into ammunition for their financial warfare, documenting every moment of struggle to weaponize against the mother who'd sacrificed everything to protect him. What was their endgame? Total control. If Ms. Bent Cole ever surfaced with inconvenient claims about your son, they were prepared to have Charles removed from her custody on grounds of parental unfitness. They have 5 years of documentation showing unstable housing, periods of homelessness, and what could be spun as neglect. Neglect caused by the poverty they engineered. Exactly. They created the conditions they planned to use against her. Clayton felt sick. What about my relationship with Isabella? Was any of it real? Your entire courtship was a calculated campaign. Webb produced a USB drive, recorded conversations between Isabella and her father, planning your seduction like a military operation. They researched your preferences, your schedule, your vulnerabilities. Every chance encounter was choreographed. How long were they planning this? From the moment they identified you as a solution to their financial problems, the Whitmore textile empire has been hemorrhaging money for 8 years. They needed your wealth to survive, and they saw Ms. Bent Cole as an obstacle to a merger worth $500 million. Clayton thought about the elaborate courtship, the seemingly perfect compatibility, the way Isabella had appeared in his life at exactly the right moment to comfort him after losing Olivia. None of it had been coincidence. All of it had been manipulation. What about the wedding that never happened? Called off when they realized you were actively searching for Ms. Bent Cole, Isabella's father decided it was too risky to proceed with a groom who might abandon the marriage if his ex-girlfriend ever surfaced with inconvenient truths. So they made sure she'd never get that chance. They made sure she'd never get close enough to threaten their investment in you, but they kept the surveillance active as insurance. Clayton studied the evidence of his stolen life, his stolen family, 6 years of Olivia raising their son alone while believing he'd chosen wealth over love. The rage building in his chest was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. "I want them destroyed," he said quietly. "Legal channels will take time, but the case is solid. Financial fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, illegal surveillance, falsification of documents. They're looking at federal charges that could put them away for decades." How long? 6 months to build an airtight case. Maybe less if Margaret Walsh continues cooperating. She's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. And proving the truth to Olivia? The evidence speaks for itself. Question is whether she's ready to hear it. Clayton thought about Olivia's carefully constructed walls, the pain in her eyes, the way she held herself apart from him, like someone who'd learned that hope was the cruelest emotion of all. Learning the truth might heal her, or it might shatter her completely. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Charles peeked around the office door, his hair still damp from his morning bath, and his small face bright with curiosity. "Clayton, Mama says breakfast is ready. She made real pancakes because she said you're a menace to breakfast foods everywhere." Despite everything, Clayton smiled. "I'll be right there, buddy." Charles lingered, studying Webb with the frank interest that 6-year-olds brought to new people. "Are you Clayton's friend?" "I work for him," Webb said carefully. "What kind of work?" "I find out true things when people lie about important stuff." Charles nodded seriously. "That sounds like a really important job. Lying about important stuff can really hurt people's feelings." After Charles left, Webb gathered his materials with practiced efficiency. "Smart kid. Too smart. He figured out I was his father before I had the courage to tell him. What are you going to do about the Whitmores?" Clayton looked at the evidence of the conspiracy that had cost him 6 years of his son's life, watching Olivia struggle in poverty while believing she'd been abandoned by choice. The people responsible were going to pay for every tear Charles had seen his mother cry, every night they'd slept in their car, every moment of suffering their greed had caused. "I'm going to make sure they never hurt another family the way they hurt mine." Through legal channels? Exclusively legal channels. I won't have Charles caught in the crossfire when this comes out, and Ms. Bent Cole deserves to know the truth. But she also deserves to decide how she wants that truth revealed. Webb nodded and headed for the door. "One piece of advice. Don't make the same mistake Isabella made. Don't decide what's best for her without asking what she wants." As the investigator left, Clayton remained at his window, watching Chicago wake up to another day of ordinary dreams and private battles. Somewhere in the city, Isabella Whitmore was probably planning her next move, unaware that her house of cards was about to collapse. But upstairs, Charles was eating pancakes and asking endless questions, while Olivia pretended she wasn't softening toward the man who'd once broken her heart and was now desperately trying to prove he deserved a second chance. The truth could wait another day. His family, fragile as it was, complicated as it was, could not. Chapter 6. The Price of Truth. Sometimes the cost of redemption is everything you thought you wanted, and the reward is everything that actually matters. The Palmer House ballroom sparkled like a jeweled cave. Chicago's most powerful people gathered for the annual Children's Foundation Gala, an event that raised millions for disadvantaged youth while allowing the privileged to feel virtuous about their wealth. Clayton stood at the entrance in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the billionaire philanthropist while planning to detonate his entire social world. Isabella appeared at his side before he'd taken 10 steps, radiant in emerald silk that probably cost more than most families spent on housing. Her diamond necklace caught the chandelier's light like captured fire, and her hand on his arm felt like beautiful poison seeping through expensive fabric. "Darling," she purred, Her voice pitched for intimate conversation despite the crowd around them. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about tonight. I never forget important occasions. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. You seem different tonight, more focused. Do I? It's quite attractive, actually. Success suits you. Her laugh tinkled like breaking crystal. Speaking of which, Daddy says the merger papers are nearly finalized. We should discuss wedding dates soon. Clayton nearly choked on his champagne. Wedding dates? Don't be coy, darling. Whitmore Textiles and Osgood Industries joining forces. It's going to be the business marriage of the decade. Literally. She gestured around the ballroom with obvious satisfaction. All of this will be ours soon. The casual revelation of their relationship as a corporate acquisition should have shocked him. But after seeing Webb's evidence, nothing about Isabella's manipulation could surprise him anymore. Isabella, he said carefully, what exactly do you think is happening between us? Oh, don't pretend you don't know. The contracts, the merger, our engagement, it's all been planned for months. Daddy's lawyers have been working with yours since Christmas. My lawyers haven't mentioned any merger to me, haven't they? How strange. Her smile was razor-sharp. Well, I suppose they wanted it to be a surprise. Men do love their surprises. Clayton felt the familiar sensation of being maneuvered by someone who'd made deception into an art form. But tonight, he had his own surprise planned. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced from the small stage, we have a special presentation this evening. Mr. Clayton Osgood has asked to address you about family, truth and responsibility in our community. Isabella's grip on his arm tightened like a claw. Clayton, what are you doing? Something I should have done 6 years ago. The crowd quieted as Clayton made his way to the podium, accepting the microphone with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. 500 faces looked up at him expectantly, his business partners, social peers, the architects of the world that had conspired to keep him separated from his son. Good evening, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate space. I want to tell you about my son. The murmur that rippled through the audience was immediate and electric. Isabella's face had drained of all color. His name is Charles, Clayton continued, and he's 6 years old. He has my eyes and my stubborn cowlick and the kind of curiosity that turns simple conversations into philosophical discussions. He's brilliant and kind and braver than I'll ever be. And until 2 weeks ago, I didn't know he existed. The murmur became a roar. Phone cameras appeared, discreet at first, then openly. By morning, this would be trending on every social media platform in Chicago. I didn't know he existed, because 6 years ago, when his mother tried to tell me she was pregnant, those calls were intercepted. When she wrote letters, they were destroyed. When she tried to reach me in person, she was turned away by security, acting on orders they believed came from me. Clayton found Isabella in the crowd. She was backing toward the exit, panic replacing her usual composure. The conspiracy was elaborate, well-funded, and devastatingly effective. It cost me 6 years of my son's life. It cost his mother 6 years of struggling alone, working multiple jobs, sometimes sleeping in her car to ensure Charles had food and shelter. It cost Charles 6 years of having a father who loved him. The ballroom had gone completely silent. This wasn't typical charity gala entertainment. I'm sharing this with you tonight because I want to be absolutely clear about who I am and what I value. Some of you have been part of my life for years. You've invested in my companies, trusted me with your business, welcomed me into your homes. I want you to know that starting tomorrow, I will be a different man with different priorities. Clayton looked directly at Richard Whitmore, who sat red-faced and furious at a prime table near the stage. I will be spending my time, energy, and resources on my family. I will be learning to be the father my son deserves and the partner his mother needed 6 years ago. If that makes me unsuitable for your business ventures or social circles, I understand completely and accept the consequences." He set the microphone back on its stand and walked off the stage. The silence followed him until he reached the ballroom doors, where it exploded into chaos behind him. His phone started buzzing before he reached the valet stand. Calls from investors, business partners, reporters who smelled blood in the water. He turned the device off and slipped it into his pocket. The drive home through Chicago's glittering streets felt like traveling between two different worlds. Behind him lay everything he'd spent 15 years building: wealth, status, power, the respect of people whose approval had once seemed like the only currency that mattered. Ahead lay something infinitely more valuable and terrifyingly uncertain. He found Charles and Olivia in the living room, engaged in what appeared to be an epic board game battle involving dragons and medieval strategy. Charles looked up when Clayton entered, taking in the formal tuxedo with impressed eyes. "You look really fancy," the boy observed. "Was your party fun?" "It was educational," Clayton said, loosening his bow tie with relief. "Who's winning?" "Mama's beating me, but I'm learning her strategy. She's really good at thinking ahead." "Your mama is good at many things." As Clayton changed out of his formal wear, his phone, despite being turned off, somehow managed to convey the magnitude of the chaos he'd unleashed. The few glimpses he caught of social media showed his speech already viral, his stock price in free fall, and the business world reacting to his public confession with the kind of shocked disapproval usually reserved for financial crimes. Over the next week, the consequences became clear. His stock price plummeted 40%. Several major investors pulled their funding. The proposed merger with Whitmore Textiles was indefinitely postponed. Business partners who'd courted his favor for years suddenly found reasons to avoid his calls. By conservative estimates, his net worth had dropped by over $600 million. But when he came home each evening to find Charles teaching him chess strategy, while Olivia watched with something that might have been fondness, Clayton realized he'd never felt wealthier in his life. "How much trouble are you in?" Olivia asked quietly one evening, while Charles was absorbed in a puzzle. "Financially? Quite a bit. Socially? I'm probably persona non grata in most circles. Do you regret it?" Clayton looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the way the lamplight caught the gold threads in her dark hair, the careful intelligence in her eyes, the strength that radiated from every line of her body despite everything she'd endured. "Ask me again in 20 years, he said, "when Charles is grown and confident and knows without question that he's loved. When you trust me enough to believe that some promises are worth keeping. When we've built something real together out of the wreckage of what we lost." For the first time since he'd found them on those front steps, Olivia smiled, a real smile, soft and wondering and full of dangerous possibility. 20 years is a long time, she said. "I've got nowhere else I'd rather be." Charles looked up from his puzzle with the solemn expression he wore when processing important adult information. "Does this mean you're staying with us forever? If your mama will have me." "Mama!" Charles turned to Olivia with hopeful eyes. "Can we keep him?" The simple question hung in the air like a prayer. Olivia looked between Clayton and their son, seeing the future reflected in both their faces, complicated, uncertain, but built on love instead of lies. "We'll see," she said, but her voice carried something it hadn't held in 6 years. Hope. Chapter 7. Stars and Second Chances. Healing happens in the space between heartbeats, when two damaged souls choose to trust despite every reason to guard their hearts. The pain hit Olivia at 3 in the morning like lightning forged from bone and regret. She bit back a cry, not wanting to wake Charles, and fumbled for the crutches beside her bed. The prescribed medication had worn off, and the stress fracture that should have been healing was instead radiating fire up her leg with each heartbeat. She made it to the kitchen before her strength gave out. collapsing into one of Clayton's expensive chairs, while Chicago sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a constellation fallen to earth. "Can't sleep." Clayton's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled in a way that reminded her painfully of lazy Sunday mornings 6 years ago, when the world had been full of possibility. "Just need medication," she said, struggling with the childproof cap that seemed designed to defeat people in actual pain. "Go back to bed." Instead, he moved closer, gently taking the bottle from her shaking fingers and opening it with ease. He shook 2 pills into his palm, then filled a glass with water and waited patiently while she swallowed them. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "How bad is it tonight?" "It's manageable. Olivia." Something in the way he said her name, gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd learned to see through her deflections, made her defenses crack. "It hurts more than it should," she admitted. "Dr. Mae Jemison says that's normal with stress fractures that were neglected, but normal doesn't make it hurt less." Clayton pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "When was the last time you took a full dose during the day?" "I don't like taking them when Charles is awake. They make me foggy and he needs me to be sharp. Charles is sleeping now. And there's nothing wrong with needing help sometimes. I've needed help for 6 years, she said bitterly. I'm tired of being someone who needs things. You're not someone who needs things. You're someone who's been doing the impossible without support. And your body is finally demanding that you slow down long enough to heal. The medication was beginning to dull the sharp edges of her pain, but it was also lowering the walls she'd spent 6 years building around her heart. "Why are you being so patient with me?" she asked. "Because I love you." "You can't love me. You don't know me anymore, don't I?" Clayton leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "I know you've been having nightmares about losing Charles. I know you check on him at least twice every night to make sure he's still breathing. I know you save the last bite of every meal for him, even when you're still hungry." Each observation hit her like a small shock. "How do you know those things?" "Because I've been paying attention. Because I see how you touch your throat when you're worried. How you smile differently when you think no one's watching. How you whisper Charles's name like a prayer every time you think something bad might happen to him." The accuracy of his observations was devastating. No one had seen her this clearly in years, maybe ever. "I was so angry," she whispered. "I know. When Charles would ask about his father, I used to lie awake planning what I'd say if I ever saw you again. All the ways I'd make you understand what you'd put us through. What did you want to say?" The words poured out of her like poison being drawn from a wound. 6 years of suppressed rage and grief finally finding voice. "That loving you nearly killed me. That I called your office 19 times in 3 days after I found out I was pregnant, and each time they told me you were unavailable, I died a little more. That I stood outside your building until security made me leave. 8 months pregnant and desperate enough to beg." Clayton's face had gone pale in the city light, filtering through the windows. "That I went into labor alone. Because I still believed even then that you'd come if you just knew. That Charles's first word was Dada, and it shattered my heart because there was no daddy to hear it. That every milestone felt like evidence of your choice to abandon us, Olivia. That the worst part wasn't the poverty or the exhaustion or even the loneliness. The worst part was that I still loved you. Through all of it, I still loved you, and I hated myself for being that weak." Clayton was quiet for a long moment, processing the depth of her pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I need to show you something." He disappeared down the hallway, returning with his laptop. The screen showed a private investigator's report dated 3 years after Charles's birth. "I hired 7 different firms to look for you," he said quietly. "Spent over $400,000 trying to find any trace of where you'd gone. They all came back empty, like you'd vanished from the face of the earth." Olivia stared at the documentation of his search, feeling something fundamental shift in her chest. "You looked for me?" "For 3 years. I called every hospital, every social service agency, every shelter from here to California. I hired investigators to trace your family connections, your college friends, anyone who might know where you'd gone. But I was here, in Chicago, working downtown, living in this same area. I know that now. The investigators were being fed false information, told you'd moved to Portland, that you'd married someone named Audrey, that you'd specifically requested no contact from your past. Who told them that?" Clayton showed her more documents, bank records revealing payments from Whitmore accounts to 3 different investigation firms. "They made sure I'd never find you, and they made sure you'd never reach me. We were kept apart deliberately. The evidence was overwhelming and infuriating. They'd been pawns in someone else's game, their love manipulated, and their son deprived of his father by people who saw their relationship as nothing more than a financial inconvenience. I need some air," she said, the weight of 6 years of misdirected anger crushing her chest. "Let me help you." "I can, please." Something in his voice made her accept his assistance. He helped her to the balcony, supporting her weight with gentle strength while Chicago spread out below them like a map of broken dreams and second chances. "Look up," he said softly. The sky was unusually clear for the city, stars visible despite the light pollution. They scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet, ancient and constant and beautiful. "My grandfather used to tell me that promises made under starlight were the only ones that really counted," Clayton said. He claimed stars had been witnessing human love for millions of years, and they knew the difference between words and truth. Olivia looked up at the celestial audience, feeling small and hopeful and terrifyingly vulnerable. "So I'm promising you, under these stars, that I will never stop choosing you and Charles. Not for business, not for money, not because it's easy or convenient. I will be here when Charles loses his first tooth and when he graduates from college and when he brings his first heartbreak home for us to help. Heal. Clayton, I promise that I will. Spend every day for the rest of my life making up for the years I wasn't here. I can't give you back his first steps or his first words or the nights you stayed awake worrying about money. But I can give you every day from now until forever, if you'll let me." Tears were sliding down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they felt like healing instead of pain. "I love you," she whispered. "I never stopped even when I tried to." When Clayton kissed her, she tasted salt from both their tears, and 6 years of longing and the dangerous, wonderful possibility of a love that might actually survive this time. Above them, the stars bore witness to 2 hearts choosing hope over fear, trust over safety, and the radical faith that some things, some people, are worth the risk of believing in again. The city hummed on below them, indifferent to the small miracle happening 20 floors above its streets. 2 people finding their way back to each other through the wreckage of lies and the simple, transformative power of a 6-year-old boy who'd never stopped believing that families could be whole. Chapter 8. Small hands, big dreams. Children see the world not as it is, but as it could be. And sometimes their innocence is the only compass we need to find our way home. The morning sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Olivia took her first steps without crutches in 10 weeks. The physical therapy had been grueling, each session a battle between her body's desire to heal and her mind's insistence that depending on Clayton, even temporarily, was dangerous territory for her carefully guarded heart. "Mama, you're walking!" Charles shouted from across the living room, where he'd constructed an elaborate city from blocks, action figures, and what appeared to be every pillow in the apartment. "Look how good you're walking." Olivia smiled, marveling at the absence of sharp pain, the freedom of movement that felt like emerging from a long, complicated dream. Dr. Mae Jemison says I'm officially healed. Does that mean we have to leave now? The question stopped her cold. In the kitchen doorway, Clayton had gone very still, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. What do you mean, baby? Well, you said we were only staying here until you got better. And now you're better, so... Charles's voice trailed off. His 6-year-old logic creating a scenario that none of the adults had wanted to address directly. Olivia looked at Clayton, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his face. They'd been living in a bubble of temporary domesticity. But Charles's healing had always been the unspoken deadline for decisions they'd been avoiding. Charles, she said carefully, what would you like to happen? I'd like us to stay together, all three of us, like a real family. We are a real family, sweetheart. But families can live in different ways. But I don't want to live in different ways, Charles interrupted with the kind of passionate clarity that children brought to important subjects. I like living here with you and Clayton. I like eating breakfast together and playing games after dinner and having someone read me stories who does all the voices right. Clayton set down his coffee mug and moved closer. Charles, what if staying here meant some big changes? What if it wasn't just temporary anymore? What kind of changes? Well, I'd want to officially adopt you. That means I'd legally be your father, not just someone who cares about you. Charles considered this with typical seriousness. Would that mean I could call you Dad instead of Clayton, if you wanted to? And would it mean you'd come to school events and help me with homework and teach me how to drive when I'm old enough? Yes to all of that. And would you promise not to leave, even when I'm being difficult or Mama is worried about something? The question cut straight to the heart of Charles's deepest fear, that the adults in his life would disappear when things got complicated. I promise, Clayton said solemnly. Even when you're difficult, even when Mama worries, even when I make mistakes or burn dinner or can't figure out how to help with your math homework. Charles turned to Olivia with hopeful eyes. Mama, do you want Clayton to be my real dad? The question she'd been avoiding for weeks hung in the air between them. Olivia looked at Clayton, this man who'd learned to make pancakes and read bedtime stories and love her son as if he'd been there from the beginning. I think, she said slowly, that he already is your real dad. The adoption would just make it official. Charles's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, even though he missed the first part of my life. Being a father isn't about being there from the beginning, Olivia said, the words surprising her with their truth. It's about showing up when you're needed and staying when things get hard. Like how you're my real mama, even though you didn't give birth to me in your tummy like some other mamas do. Olivia blinked in confusion. Charles, I did give birth to you. I know that. But you taught me that being someone's real parent is about love and taking care of them. Not just about biology. So Clayton can be my real dad because he loves me and wants to take care of me, right? The 6-year-old's logic was flawless and heartbreaking in its simplicity. Right, Clayton said, his voice thick with emotion. If you want me to be, I do want that. But I have some questions first. Okay. Are you going to marry Mama? The question landed like a small bomb in the middle of their family discussion. Olivia felt her cheeks flush, while Clayton looked like he'd been asked to solve advanced calculus. Charles, Olivia said quickly, that's not something you need to worry about. But I do need to worry about it, Charles insisted, with the stubborn determination he'd inherited from both parents. Because if you get married, then we'd really be a family forever. And if you don't get married, then maybe you might decide you don't want to live together anymore. Marriage doesn't guarantee that people stay together, baby. I know that. David at school has divorced parents, and they still both love him. But they got divorced because they stopped loving each other. You and Clayton still love each other, right? Out of the mouths of babes. Charles, Clayton said carefully, your mama and I are still figuring out our relationship. But no matter what happens between us, I will always be your father, and I will always be part of your life. That's a promise that has nothing to do with marriage. But you do love Mama, right? Very much. And Mama, you love Clayton, right? Olivia felt trapped by her son's relentless logic and innocent faith. Yes, I love him. Then why can't you just get married and be happy? It seems really simple to me. Clayton laughed, despite the tension. Most important things seem simple when you're 6. I'm almost 7, Charles corrected. And I think grown-ups make things too complicated. If you love each other and you want to live together and take care of each other, then you should just do it. What if we make mistakes? Olivia asked. What if we hurt each other's feelings sometimes? Then you say sorry and try to do better. That's what you taught me. The simplicity of it was staggering. Here was a child who'd experienced instability and uncertainty for most of his life, offering a roadmap to happiness based on love, forgiveness, and the courage to keep trying. Charles, Clayton said seriously, if your mama and I did get married someday, and if I adopted you officially, would you want to change your last name? To what? Well, you could be Charles Osgood or Charles Bent Cole Osgood, or keep Charles Bent Cole. Whatever feels right to you. Charles thought about this with the gravity of someone choosing a superhero identity. I think I'd like Charles Bent Cole Osgood. That way I have pieces of both of you, and everyone will know I belong to both of you. That's a very wise choice, Olivia said, her voice catching on the emotion of hearing their son plan his place in a family that finally felt permanent. So, when are you getting married? Charles asked, with the matter-of-fact expectation that decisions, once made, should be acted upon immediately. Charles, Olivia laughed. Oh, you can't just decide that we're getting married. Why not? You love each other. I want us to be a family, and Clayton wants to adopt me. What else do you need to decide? Clayton knelt down to Charles's level, bringing them eye to eye. Your mama needs to know that she can trust me completely. That's going to take time. How much time? However long she needs. Charles turned to Olivia with the expectant look of someone waiting for a reasonable timeline. Mama, how long do you need? Put on the spot by her 6-year-old, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built together over the past 10 weeks. Olivia felt her carefully constructed fears crumbling under the weight of simple truth. I don't know, she said honestly, but maybe we could start with seeing what it feels like to make this official. The 3 of us living together, building something real, like a trial run, Charles asked. Like a commitment, Clayton corrected. To you, to this family, to figuring out how to love each other the right way. Charles nodded as if this made perfect sense. And if the commitment goes well, then maybe marriage later? Maybe, Olivia said, and for the first time, the word felt like possibility instead of fear. Good, Charles said, returning to his block city with the satisfied air of someone who'd successfully negotiated an important treaty. I'll plan the adoption party and the maybe wedding. I'm good at planning celebrations. As Olivia and Clayton watched their son arrange his toy family in their blockhouse, they realized that sometimes the most important decisions weren't made in dramatic moments, but in quiet kitchens, guided by the wisdom of a child who understood that love, in the end, was really very simple. You show up, you stay, you keep choosing each other one day at a time. Chapter 9. Fractures and Faith. Truth has a way of burning through lies like sunlight through fog, but sometimes the hardest person to convince of your innocence is the one who's been hurt so deeply that trust feels like betrayal. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by courier while Charles was at school, and Olivia was attempting to teach Clayton the finer points of laundry folding. The return address read, Whitmore and Associates Legal Services, and Clayton's face went pale as he tore it open. What is it? Olivia asked, noting his expression. Clayton read the documents twice before answering, his jaw tightening with each page. Isabella is suing me for breach of promise and demanding $200 million in damages. Breach of promise? For what? She claims we had a verbal agreement to merge our companies through marriage, and my public rejection of her has cost the Whitmore family their financial future. Olivia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Can she do that? She can try, but more importantly, Clayton showed her the second set of papers. She's filed for emergency custody of Charles. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. On what grounds? She claims I'm the biological father, and that your period of homelessness makes you an unfit guardian. She's arguing that Charles should be placed with his paternal family while DNA testing is conducted. That's insane. She has no claim to Charles. She doesn't need a valid claim, just enough legal maneuvering to create chaos and force us into court. Clayton crumpled the papers in his fist. This is revenge, pure and simple. Olivia sank into the nearest chair, her newly healed foot suddenly feeling unsteady. How long do we have? The custody hearing is scheduled for next week. She's requesting emergency placement, which means the judge could rule immediately. Next week? Olivia's voice rose to near panic. Charles doesn't even know any of this is happening. How do I explain that someone wants to take him away from us? We don't explain it. We fight it. What if we lose? Clayton knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. We won't lose. Isabella doesn't have any real evidence, and David Webb has been building our case against the Whitmores for months. This lawsuit is actually going to backfire on her. How can you be so sure? Because I know something Isabella doesn't know yet. What? Clayton smiled grimly. Margaret Walsh kept copies of everything. Every forged document, every intercepted call, every payment made to keep us apart. She's been cooperating with federal investigators for 6 months. Before Olivia could respond, the elevator chimed. They weren't expecting anyone, and Clayton's doorman was usually meticulous about announcing visitors. Isabella Whitmore stepped out like she owned the building, dressed in a cream-colored suit that screamed old money, and wearing the kind of confident smile that suggested she held all the winning cards. Isabella, Clayton said, standing to put himself between her and Olivia. You're trespassing. Oh, I don't think so. After all, we're about to be family. Her gaze swept over the domestic scene, folded laundry on the couch, Charles's artwork on the refrigerator, the comfortable disorder of people actually living together. How charmingly a domestic. What do you want? To discuss our son, of course. We don't have a son, don't we? Isabella reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I think you'll find these documents quite interesting. She spread the contents across Clayton's coffee table with theatrical precision. DNA test results, birth certificates, medical records, and photographs that made Olivia's blood run cold. This, Isabella said, pointing to a birth certificate dated 6 months ago, is Charles Whitmore Osgood, born at a private clinic in Geneva. My son, our son. That's impossible, Olivia said. Is it? Tell me, Clayton, do you remember our last night together? 3 months ago, after that lovely dinner at Alinea, you'd been drinking, feeling sorry for yourself about this whole domestic fantasy, and I was available. You're lying. The DNA evidence suggests otherwise. Isabella's smile was all sharp edges. 99.7% probability of paternity. Quite conclusive, wouldn't you say? Clayton studied the documents, his face cycling through confusion and growing alarm. Even if this were real, which it isn't, this child would be 6 months old. Charles is 6 years old. Oh, this isn't about your Charles, darling. This is about my Charles, your other son, the one who's been living with a nanny in Switzerland while I waited for the right moment to introduce him to his father. The words hit the room like a bomb. Olivia felt the world tilt sideways as the implications crashed over her. You're saying Clayton has another child, she whispered. I'm saying Clayton has been living a double life, playing house with you while maintaining his real relationship with me. That's not true, Clayton said desperately. Olivia, you have to know that's not true. But Olivia was staring at the photographs spread across the table. Images of Clayton entering and leaving hotels, dining with a blonde woman whose face was carefully obscured, embracing someone in what looked like intimate moments. These were taken over the past 3 months, Isabella continued smoothly, while he was supposedly devoted to your little family reunion. Those are fake, Clayton said immediately. Staged photos using body doubles. Are they? I have witnesses who can testify otherwise. Hotel staff who remember serving champagne to your room. Restaurant servers who saw you with your secret companion. Olivia felt something breaking apart inside her chest. The photos looked real. The hotel settings were authentic. And the timeline coincided with Clayton's supposed business trips. I'll give you time to process this revelation, Isabella said, gathering her materials with practiced efficiency. But I want you to understand something clearly. My son deserves to know his father, and frankly, I'm tired of sharing. She paused at the elevator, turning back with a smile that could have cut glass. Oh, and Olivia? You might want to ask Clayton about his recent trip to Geneva, just to satisfy your curiosity about where he really goes on those business meetings. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving a silence that felt like the end of the world. Olivia, Clayton said carefully, this is all fabricated, every piece of it. Did you go to Geneva 3 months ago? Yes, but for business. To meet with Swiss banks about tracking Whitmore financial records. I was building our case against them. But you were there when these photos were supposedly taken, when this DNA sample was allegedly collected. I never saw Isabella. I never had contact with any child. I was there for 18 hours, tracking money transfers through 3 different banks. But the doubt was already spreading through Olivia's chest like poison. She'd been here before, trusting Clayton completely, only to have that trust weaponized against her. The evidence looked convincing. The timeline matched his absence, and Isabella's confidence suggested she had more ammunition waiting. I need some time to think, Olivia said quietly. Don't let her destroy what we've built. What if what we've built isn't real? It's real. You know it's real. But as Olivia looked at the photographs scattered across Clayton's coffee table, evidence of betrayal or elaborate fiction, she couldn't tell which. She realized she didn't know anything anymore. When Charles gets home from school, she said, her voice hollow, don't mention any of this. I won't have him scared about custody battles or confused about whether his father is trustworthy. He's our son, Olivia. No court is going to take him away from us. Is he our son, or is he just my son and your mistake? The question hung between them like a blade, cutting through the fragile trust they'd rebuilt over the past months. Outside, Chicago hummed with ordinary life. People going to work, children playing in parks, families believing in their own permanence while the world shifted beneath their feet. But inside Clayton's penthouse, a 6-year-old boy's future hung in the balance, while the adults who loved him tried to separate truth from lies and wondered if love alone was strong enough to survive when the past came calling with legal documents and impossible choices. Chapter 10. New Foundations. Love doesn't always arrive with symphonies and sunsets. Sometimes it simply settles into the quiet spaces between fear and hope, and decides to stay. The DNA results arrived 72 hours later, hand-delivered by Clayton's attorney at dawn. Olivia watched from the kitchen doorway as he read the documents, his face cycling through relief, vindication, and something that looked like rage. Completely fabricated, he said without looking up. The lab technician was paid to falsify results using samples from 2 unrelated people. Isabella's son doesn't exist. The birth certificate is a forgery. The medical records are fake. And the Swiss clinic has no record of any child born to Isabella Whitmore. And the photographs. Professional staging company. The woman in the images is an actress hired to create compromising scenes using camera angles and body doubles. Clayton finally met her eyes. It was all lies, Liv. Every single piece. The relief should have been immediate and overwhelming. But instead, Olivia felt something complicated settling in her chest. Not quite trust, not quite doubt, but a weariness that came from having hope weaponized against her too many times. How long did it take you to prove all this? 3 days. I had investigators working around the clock. 3 days. She moved to the coffee maker, needing something to do with her hands. Must have been expensive proving your innocence that quickly. I would have spent everything I own to clear this up. Would you? The question carried the weight of 6 years of abandonment, 10 weeks of careful rebuilding, and 3 days of wondering if she'd been fooled again by a man who seemed too good to be true. Yes, Clayton said simply, because you and Charles are the only things that matter, even when you weren't sure, even when you thought there might be another child who needed you. Clayton was quiet for a moment, understanding the deeper question she was asking. Are you asking if I would have chosen you even if Isabella's claims were real? I guess I am. The answer is yes. Even if there had been another child, I would have handled my responsibilities and I would have chosen you. Because what we have isn't about biology or obligation or who came first. It's about love. It's about the life we're building together. Charles wandered into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in 6 directions and his pajamas wrinkled from sleep. Are you guys having a serious talk? A little bit, Olivia said carefully. Good serious or bad serious? Good serious, I think, Clayton said, looking at Olivia hopefully. Charles climbed onto his usual stool and surveyed the adults with the kind of wisdom that 6-year-olds sometimes possessed. Is this about the mean lady who came here yesterday? You heard that? Clayton asked. I always listen when grown-ups are upset. Kids are good at knowing when something's wrong. Olivia felt something crack inside her chest. Of course Charles had heard. Of course he'd absorbed the tension and fear that had filled the apartment since Isabella's visit. Charles, she said gently, what would you think if things got complicated with our family? If people tried to make problems for us? I'd think that people who try to break up families are mean and probably scared of something. Scared of what? Scared that if other people are happy, it makes them look sad in comparison. The observation was startlingly mature for a 6-year-old, delivered with the matter-of-fact wisdom of someone who'd learned early to read adult emotions and motivations. But you know what I'd also think, Charles continued. I'd think that if we love each other and we stick together, then the mean people can't really hurt us, because love is stronger than being mean. Olivia looked at her son, this wise, beautiful boy who'd somehow emerged from years of instability with an unshakable faith in the power of love and family, and felt her carefully constructed walls crumble. You're right, she said. Love is stronger. So we're staying together, all 3 of us. Olivia looked at Clayton, at this man who'd learned to make pancakes and read bedtime stories and fight legal battles to protect their family, who'd given up a fortune to be here, who'd proven his love not with grand gestures, but with daily choices to show up, to stay, to keep choosing them. Yes, she said. We're staying together. Charles cheered and launched himself off his stool, creating an impromptu group hug that lasted until they were all laughing, and the morning light filled the kitchen with the kind of golden warmth that made everything feel possible. Can we make this official? Charles asked when they finally untangled. Like really official with papers and everything? What kind of papers? Clayton asked. Adoption papers. And maybe wedding papers too, if you're ready for that. The suggestion hung in the air like a bridge between their complicated past and their uncertain future. Charles, Olivia said carefully, adoption and marriage are really big decisions. I know they are. That's why I've been thinking about them for weeks. You have? Uh-huh. And I decided that if Clayton wants to adopt me, and you want to marry him, and he wants to marry you, then we should just do it. Because we already act like a family, so we might as well make it real. The logic was unassailable and terrifying in its simplicity. What if we make mistakes? Olivia asked. What if we hurt each other sometimes? Then we'll say sorry and try to do better. That's what families do. Clayton knelt down to Charles's level, bringing them eye to eye. If I adopt you officially, it means I'll be your legal father forever. Even if your mama and I sometimes disagree about things, even if our family isn't perfect, even if life gets complicated. I know what adoption means, Charles said seriously. It means you choose to be my dad, not because you have to, but because you want to. That's exactly right. And if you and Mama get married, it means you choose to be a family forever, not just until it gets hard. Also exactly right. Charles turned to Olivia with hopeful eyes. So, Mama, are you ready to choose forever? Looking at her son's expectant face, then at Clayton's careful hope, Olivia realized that she'd been ready for weeks. The fear had been stronger than her readiness, but it hadn't been more real. Yes, she said, the word feeling like stepping off a cliff into open sky. I'm ready to choose forever. 6 months later, Cook County Courthouse hosted the smallest wedding in its history. Just a judge, 2 witnesses, and a 6-year-old ring bearer who took his job so seriously that he practiced walking down the hallway for an hour before the ceremony. Do you, Olivia Bentcole, take Clayton to be your husband, to love and honor and probably argue with sometimes, but to never give up on? I do. Do you, Clayton Osgood, take Olivia to be your wife, to support and cherish and definitely burn breakfast for occasionally, but to never stop trying? I do. And do you, Charles Bentcole Osgood, promise to be the best son ever and to help your parents remember that love is supposed to be fun? I do. Charles shouted, then whispered loudly, Did I do it right? The judge smiled. Perfect. They signed the marriage certificate and the adoption papers on the same day, making official what had been true for months, that families weren't just born. They were chosen day after day, choice by choice, until love became stronger than fear and hope became more powerful than doubt. That evening, they sat on their balcony watching Chicago twinkle in the darkness below, Charles asleep between them after an exhausting day of being the center of attention. Any regrets? Olivia asked, playing with the simple gold band that felt like it had always belonged on her finger. About what? Giving up your old life for this one? Clayton considered the question seriously. A year ago, I was sitting in empty restaurants having conversations with people whose names I can't remember, talking about profit margins and market projections. I went home to an empty penthouse and fell asleep wondering why success felt like failure. And now I wake up to a 6-year-old explaining why pancakes need happy thoughts to cook properly. I spend my evenings being beaten at board games by someone who hasn't lost his sense of wonder. I fall asleep next to the woman I love, planning family adventures and worrying about parent-teacher conferences. Does that scare you? It terrifies me. But you know what scared me more? The possibility of missing it. The possibility of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose love over everything else. Olivia curled closer to him, breathing in the scent of home and hope and hard-won happiness. I love you, Clayton Osgood. I love you too, Mrs. Osgood. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative promises continued their ancient dance, blessing this small family that had found their way to each other through lies and heartbreak, and the simple miracle of a 6-year-old boy who'd never stopped, believing that love could make broken things whole. Their story hadn't been perfect. It had been interrupted by conspiracy and nearly destroyed by doubt, and saved by the radical faith that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. But they'd survived because they'd chosen each other day after day, with patience and pancakes and the understanding that real love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth the beautiful, complicated work of building a life together. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.